talking right now to Star Tribune Timberwolves beat writer Chris Hine. Happy Ant release day to those who celebrate Tuesday, June 3rd. You've got it right there, Chris.
Yep.
All of you can get it in your hands too, wherever you buy your books. A long time coming. Congratulations on getting this out. How does it feel in this moment to have it in your hands, to be talking about not just some future date where it's going to be out or
it feels good because I've been telling people pre-order
Right.
for so many weeks now, and now it's good. It's like it's out now. You could actually just buy it off of your preferred retailer, or as people have been tweeting me, it's out locally in various bookstores. Various Barnes and Noble, Majors and Quinn had it out. Your independent booksellers, I think around the Twin Cities have it. So if you're in Minnesota, it should be out anywhere books are sold. So, and nationwide too. I'm not sure, how many Barnes and Noble, things like that throughout the country are carrying it, but it is a nationwide release. And Amazon carries it, and all your big retailers are carrying it too online.
I want to talk a little bit more about Ant and the book in just a minute, but I feel like the way this segues is I want to talk a little bit about the end of the season first, because all of this off season is in a way built around Ant, or not just this off season, but maximizing this window. He's 23 years old. It's a big window. He's under contract for a lot of years. It's a big window that they have to kind of play with here. They've been to the Western Conference Finals 2 years in a row, but in both cases losing in 5 games. And kind of funny, I made this point to a couple people. Maybe I'll start here. I'd be interested to hear what you think about this. I feel like this year's Wolves could have beaten last year's Mavericks, but nobody was beating this year's Oklahoma City Thunder.
Maybe fair. I think that's a fair statement. I thought, somebody asked me the other day if I thought last year's team was better than this year's team. And I gave that question some thought, and I'm still going to vote. I think I'm going to vote last year's team, just because I felt like last year's team was able to get to a level of dominance more consistently against better opponents than this year's team did. I feel like
I think
last year's
fair.
team. Yeah, I feel like last year's team in that Phoenix and that Denver series, that was about as locked in as I've ever seen a Timberwolves team when they were on. And this team, while it's no small feat to get to the Western Conference Finals, I just don't think they were as dominant or as locked in as that team was. Were capable of reaching the heights that last year's team was. So I think you might be right just in terms of the matchups.
And that's what I think of. I'm specifically thinking of like the ability to beat kind of a veteran team in clutch moments. They weren't ready to do that last year as much as they were this year.
Yeah, that I would agree with, because clutch situations, especially you saw in that Lakers series and even in that Warriors series a little bit, the Wolves were, when the clutch time situations came about, they were ready for them. In the Oklahoma City series, 3 of those 4 losses didn't even make it to clutch time because they were blowouts. So, that's just kind of how the cookie crumbled in that series.
Personnel boss, team president Tim Connolly talked Monday. You mapped this out nicely in kind of breaking down the things he said. I think some of the things weren't terribly surprising. He on his own future. You talk about, he's happy to be here. I think the Laurie A-Rod stuff helps us kind of think that he's going to be here long term, even though he'd moved that opt out. But some of the other things he said about, the second apron and like building around Ant, those free agents they've got, and specifically like the idea of making a big move versus standing pat and kind of like being comfortable in both worlds, but being ready if the opportunity kind of presents itself.
That's kind of the balance of the NBA, right? It's like you have these plans, you try to build continuity in the roster, and then if a major star or something, an opportunity to shake up the roster in a big way and improve comes along, It's what you do. We've seen them do it twice now in Tim Connolly's tenure with the Rudy trade and the Cat trade. I've been thinking a lot about just what the Wolves need around Anthony Edwards,
Yeah.
and kind of what that looks like for the next 5 years, 4 or 5 years going forward here. And whenever we've heard Chris Finch or Tim Connolly talk about its path to like superstardom, right?
Yeah.
What does that look like? MVP candidate, all this stuff. They always say that it's his path as a two-way player to be really locked in defensively, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like with the way they're currently constructed, with the way that they play now, and the way that they have played for the last few years, they are not able to maximize Anthony Edwards as a defensive player because they ask so much of him offensively. He's the fulcrum of the offense. Julius was able to take a little bit of the playmaking burden off of him this later in the season. But when you think of like a traditional, whether it's like a really more ball dominant point guard than Mike Conley is, somebody who's able to break the paint more, create more, shift the defense around. The Wolves don't really have that kind of player. And if you are going to unlock Anthony Edwards' potential defensively, you have to take a little bit off of his plate offensively, because it's just a fact of life in the NBA that you can't expend as much energy on both ends of the floor if you're asked to do so much at one end of it.
Yeah.
So I think they have to find somebody. That's why when I hear these rumblings about Darius Garland, I'm like, that makes some sense to me.
Yes.
Because that's the kind of guy who could take some of the burden off of Anthony Edwards' plate offensively. And that could allow him to be more engaged and more locked in defensively, maybe take some higher prime matchups on the defensive end of the floor, however you want to term it. And I think that can help unlock Anthony Edwards as a defensive player. Right now, as currently constructed, I don't know that the Wolves are able to do that.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board with this. I wasn't sure where you were going to go with this, but I've been talking about this too for a few weeks, especially.
I tend to ramble, so
you
never know where I'm going with
anything. we talked before we started recording, and you were like, "I've got some ideas about Ant," and I'm like, "Okay, good," because I do too. Yeah. And our ideas are largely the same. Like what they really lacked this season was a running mate for him in the backcourt, and largely that's what they've lacked throughout his entire career, unless you want to say D'Angelo Russell was kind of that guy, or they wanted him to be that guy, but he wasn't. He's not quite good enough, I think, and they didn't cross paths at the stage of his career that he's in right now, where he was going to be that kind of guy. But yes, a guy like Darius Garland, a guy who, can score 20 points a night, can get his own shot, someone who can take some of the ball handling off of the plate and can bring the ball up. Like, they do ask a lot of it, and I think some of that has been by design to develop that part of his game, because he's got to have that part of his game. Even if you're a shooting guard, you've got to be able to handle the ball. He had to improve that part of his game, so maybe it's a stage of development. But like, Kevin Durant doesn't do that for me, even though he can get his own shot. He can do that. He's 30. He can be 37. Like, the money, the timeline's not good. But someone like Garland, who's 25, like, it's got to be a guy on the timeline who eases some of that pressure. And I felt it especially in that Oklahoma City series, where you saw the impact of Jalen Williams on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, where he didn't always have to be the primary scorer. You could, if he's struggling a little bit, or if he needs a little bit of a mental reset, Jalen Williams, go to work, go do that stuff. And I think, yes, they got some of that out of Julius Randle, but it's not the same when it's a guy in the backcourt who can do that too.
And I mean, and having another player that could do that, even if it is alongside Julius Randle, for instance, would just help.
Make everybody better.
It would just make everybody better in that sense. I do think that if you were to add, let's say they go after KD again, just because of how prolific KD is offensively, the amount of attention he would draw, and his ability to get his own shot, I think he would lessen the burden on Ant a decent amount. I don't know if it's in that scenario, because KD is 37 years old, you would need Ant to really pick it up on the defensive end of the floor if you were going to make that lineup configuration work, most likely. So I thought the Garland stuff made sense. I don't know how that would work or if Cleveland would be interested or but just on paper, figuring out a deal that could work for both Minnesota and Cleveland, I think it would be worth exploring if you were the Wolves to see if he's available.
Does that take Jaden McDaniels though? I mean,
well, that's the question, right? What are you giving up if that's the case? I think Cleveland might have had some interest in Naz Reid a few years ago. I don't know if that would still be there. One thing you learn is if a team registers interest with somebody, doesn't necessarily mean they give up on that player a year or two later. Look at the Wolves and Dante DiVincenzo. So maybe there's a path where Naz Reid would be the piece that goes out in a deal like that. This is all wild speculation. This is not. This is just theoretical talk. This is not me reporting anything.
No, it's observations about what might fit the roster.
Might fit the roster. So I don't want like people thinking that
don't aggregate it. Aggregators.
This is not inside reporting or source knowledge or whatever. This is just spitballing on a podcast. So I think it would take probably something like that because Darius Garland's a good player, and you're going to have to give up something of value to get something of value in return. And I think if you're thinking about it, you wouldn't want to give up Jaden. I wouldn't think, just because you still want to have a good defensive team. I don't know that Darius Garland's a plus defender. I haven't really. I don't think he has that reputation. I haven't really looked into the advanced numbers. Obviously, Cleveland was a very good defensive team with him as a part of it. So you're able to build that kind of team, maybe in spite of his defense. But I think you would want to hold on to Jaden in that instance. Otherwise, then your best perimeter defender becomes Anthony Edwards in that case. And then that's really asking a lot at that point. So I don't know where that would all fit in.
And the flip side of this is you are patient for a year. You see if Terrence Shannon Jr. becomes close to that guy in his second year. You see if Rob Dillingham is ready to make that next step because you invested a lot in him. You traded up to get the number 8 pick to get Rob Dillingham. So, and you can look at it one of two ways. You can say, every year is its own opportunity. You got to go for it every year you can. Or you could look at it and you say, Oklahoma City is going to have pretty much everybody back next season. It's going to be banging your head against the wall to try to upend them in the West next season. Is next year a year to have patience over a big move?
It could be. I don't know that you can always just look at one team and say, well, if we have no shot of beating this team, therefore we shouldn't even try. I think
I agree in general that Oklahoma City is that good.
But you can say that about every team every year. I mean, the Celtics looked like they were on the verge of
that's true.
Winning 3 titles in a row or whatever like last year, and now look what happened. So I think you can't really take that attitude when it comes to the league as a whole. That being said, yes, Oklahoma City is the team everybody's chasing in the West and might be for the next 2-3 years, depending on how their contract situations and all those draft picks play out. But you bring up a good point. And listen, Rob Dillingham, what we were just talking about, Rob Dillingham could be that kind of player, probably should be that kind of player alongside Anthony Edwards, maybe what they have envisioned. It's just, I think at this point in time, it's a matter of how patient are you willing to be with Anthony Edwards going to be entering his age 24 season and Rob Dillingham entering his second year in the league. Do you have the patience to let Dillingham develop? Or do you want to try to accelerate that? And, you would potentially flip Dillingham as an asset to go in a trade for a Darius Garland or something like that. That is what we're going to be finding out. That is the multi-million-dollar question over the next 3 weeks. Patience versus making a big, significant splash to this roster. I tend to think that at some point another big splash is coming.
This offseason?
But that's what I mean. I don't think it may not come this offseason. I think the Wolves and the front office, they tend to be very patient. They don't force the issue. They don't make moves just to make moves. They wait till the time is right.
Yeah.
Just think of the cat trade. They didn't do it over the summer just because it was free agency and that's the time you make moves. They do it 2 days before training camp opens.
Because they finally
include Dante DiVincenzo. So the timing from their perspective was right basketball wise to do the deal. When they had D'Lo, they didn't deal D'Angelo Russell that offseason because the timing on a deal for D'Lo wasn't right.
Yeah.
But at the trade deadline later that year, it was. And so they traded him. So I tend to think just in general that this roster will need a significant shakeup at some point. I just don't know if that point is now or the fall or this season, or if you have to wait another couple of transaction windows for it to happen. But
that's exactly right. Yeah. The 3 potential free agents, how many do you think are back? 1, 2, all 3? 0? Probably not.
Well, let's assume that the big thing isn't coming. Like the big move isn't coming. And they opt for, let's say, continuity. My guess all along has been 2 of the 3 would be back. That's what I've written. Basically as much over the last couple of days here. And that's based on a couple of things. Number one, I don't think they're going to be operating as a second apron team next season. I think they want to get under that. And again, unless a huge move blows all their plans out of proportion and they're a second apron team again. But barring an acquisition for another superstar or whatever, I think they will be under the second apron. That's what they have been trending towards over the last year. Because of that, because of the various options that Julius Randle and Naz Reid have, whether they opt in or opt out, I think that there's room, no matter what sort of configuration happens with the opt-ins or opt-outs. I think there can be enough room to re-sign both of them and stay under the second apron. They can make that work. At least it seems like that on paper. You never know, especially with Naz Reid, if he enters free agency, what sort of offer may be out there. But that's part of the problem this year for free agents is there's not a lot of teams with a lot of cap room. So it makes it very hard to get a big payday on the open market. So I think that favors the Wolves in these option periods. So I think that there could be enough to have Randle and Reid both back. If one of them leaves, I think that then opens the door to bring Alexander Walker back because he's probably going to make the mid-level and not much more, or not more than the mid-level, at least from another team. So if Randle or Reid do end up leaving, it does open the door for Nickeil to come back. But I tend to think if Randle and Reid come back, Nickeil might be the odd man out.
Let's go to the book. Ant, like we talked about at the beginning, is out now. Obviously, it's about Anthony Edwards. What did you, along the way, you learned a ton of things about him, obviously. What about him were you I was surprised by, or what did you learn in the process of reporting this that, obviously tons of these things making the book, the anecdotes, things like that, as we kind of think about what he is to this point, and then, from this point forward, there's this book, and now there's the entire rest of his, like kind of the rest of the chapter of his life. How do we go forward from where we are right now with this 23-year-old and this book that you've kind of got his life story to this moment?
Yeah, I think you see the competitiveness that developed when he was a teenager. You see the drive. Tim Connolly has a good line in the book, and Ant was addicted to competition. We were trying to get him addicted to basketball. And I think you've seen that transformation happening ever since Tim Connolly came in. And that is, Ant has always had a strong work ethic. He's always been in the gym. He's always wanted to work on his game. But I think what they've really worked on the last couple of years is really getting him to understand the nuances and finer points of the game and the finer things that he had to do, whether it was taking care of his body, a little better diet, sleep, all these things that it takes a couple of years a lot of times for younger players to really learn how important those are. So I think at this point they've got that kind of locked in with him. A lot of that stuff is a lot better than it was, year 2, even year 3.
Yeah.
And he's, at this point in his career, he's seen every defense that every team is ever going to throw at him. So now it's all about repetition. It's all about knowing what to do when you see a certain look, adjusting on the fly. Like he's turning into a basketball mind, and that's one of the things that has grown over the last couple of years. It's not perfect, and like I said, I think defensively, I think he and this team, as Oklahoma City pointed out, they have a long way to go in terms of team discipline when it comes to especially game plan discipline and things like that. Oklahoma City was about as good as it gets when it comes to that stuff. And I think that was a bit of a wake-up call for him and for the team. As Ant referenced after game 5, they were like 15 puppets on a string.
Yeah.
Like that's how tightly choreographed it all was. So I think, you learn from these experiences. He's learned throughout his career. And I think that's also what it takes. I've learned that is like, you could tell him X, Y, and Z about what he may face, but he's got to experience it himself before he's able to really process what he or the team has to do. And, the Dallas loss, the Oklahoma City loss, these are all important learning points in his career that you hope that he internalizes in a good way and makes adjustments moving forward.
Is that maturity then, that continued evolution of maturity, especially as a two-way player, is that his next kind of hill to conquer, or is it something, specific to his game? I feel like, was it Finch maybe was referencing like closing situations, like finding his spots, knowing like the on his court where he can score reliably instead of just like drives and threes.
Yeah, having like you said, a kind of a package to go to in late game situations is something that they're going to have to develop. But I think he made leaps there in the playoffs. I think he showed that in the Lakers and Warriors series and how he navigated some of the end of the game situations there. And I even think game 4 against Oklahoma City, like I thought he was making largely the right plays down the stretch of that game for as much criticism as he got. In that game,
he just couldn't get stops.
He couldn't get stops, and he started the game slow. That was the problem. The way he played the second half of that game was fine, but we don't have to relitigate that. But I think he's always been a good on-ball defender throughout his career, and something he's always enjoyed too throughout his basketball playing days. But the off-ball defense is what still needs the work and the attention. So. Honing in on that and keeping the improvement going there is what he will need defensively.
Well, everybody should be looking forward to reading the book, following his journey from this point forward. I believe there's an event too coming up, right? That you'll be doing
Majors and Quinn on June 18th.
Okay.
We'll be doing an event there, and I think I'm supposed to be at the Barnes & Noble in Uptown on June 28th.
Okay.
Saturday afternoon. So
awesome.
We've got a couple events coming up for you to come out and get your book signed if you'd like. Come say hi, and we'll chat about it.
Just a few things going on around that: free agency, the draft, and by the way, they have like for a team that made a Western Conference Finals run, they have nice draft picks.
They have nice draft capital. Yeah, 17 and 31. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Tim Connolly has never been one to. I don't know if he's traded every year in the draft that he's been here, but hasn't been one to stand pat with whatever picks they have. He's moved around the board a lot. So just because they have 17 and 31 doesn't mean that they're going to end up there on draft night. So we'll see.
Well, and last year when they made that trade for Cat, everyone's like, "Oh, that pick from Detroit's never going to convey."
And here it is. You never know.
They are 17. You never know. And always good to have. Was it the Utah pick at the top of the second round?
Yep. The Utah pick from the D'Lo trade from a few years ago. Yep.
Got it. Well, Chris, great stuff all year. Congrats again on the book. I will go read it as soon as possible, and everybody else should too. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir.